Okay, thank you, Lorraine. Thanks for coming to the last session of the day. What I'm going to be doing is talking today about two projects that have been run through CEPS. One, the Community Capacity project that is being led through UQ, in which there was a booster sample done with ethnic minority groups in Brisbane and Melbourne. And I'll also be looking at the Queensland Community Engagement Trial as well, which was a project, major project that Lorraine ran in collaboration with Queensland Police Service. So I just want to start by making a number of acknowledgements, and that's obviously the funding of the Australian Research Council. These projects were funded through a number of grants as well as through the CEPS project funding. And I also want to thank my collaborators at University of Queensland, and this is a perfect example of a really successful sort of cross-nodal collaboration between Griffith and UQ, which I'm very happy to be part of. Okay, so what I'm going to start off doing is talking about the challenges that police face policing ethnic minority groups and people who move to this country from very, very different countries to our own. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about my work on procedural justice and how I've found that procedural justice can actually be used by police to build trust among these communities. I'm going to be presenting data from two projects, Community Capacity Survey and the QSET trial. And what I'm going to do is conclude at the end of the presentation to show that procedural justice policing shows quite a lot of promise for fostering trust among these ethnic minority groups. So in setting the context, it's only really been in the last 40 years that we've seen large-scale multi-ethnic migration from non-European countries. Prior to 1973, there were laws in place restricting non-white immigration into the country. And it's only, as I said, been about 40 years that we've really seen people immigrating from these countries that have got very different values and beliefs to traditional white settlement. As of 2012, now about 30% of our population can say that they were born overseas, with almost half of our population having at least one parent born overseas. So we can see that the changing face of Australia has significantly changed over this last 40 years. So this increase in diversity brings a lot of benefits, obviously new ideas, new perspectives, great new food options, but it also poses a number of challenges, and in particular for policing. And police have found it quite challenging to sometimes police and govern these new communities. I found a quote written back in 1992 by Bird, and even back at that stage there was the acknowledgement that policing migrant communities was one of the most pressing challenges that Australian police face. And I don't think actually that there's been much difference in that over the last 20 years. Police still face similar challenges. So why is this the case? Why do they face so many challenges policing minority groups? Well, there's been a whole raft of research undertaken that shows that minority groups are less trusting of police. This has been shown in Australia and overseas. They're less likely to engage with police. Okay, and by engagement I mean they're less likely to report crime to police. They're less likely to report their own victimisation. And Sharon Pickering actually alluded to this in her talk on her research in Victoria earlier today. Policing ethnic minority youth is a particular challenge for police. Okay, we all know that youth in general are more challenging to police, but this is compounded by the ethnicity issues and the difference in values and beliefs of ethnic minority youth. So why are these groups, for example, less trusting? Well, it's been suggested that this distrust can be caused by personal as well as vicarious experiences with police. Okay, it's not necessarily the case that they have had bad experiences with police in Australia, but for many migrants moving to Australia, they may have faced very unpleasant experiences with police overseas in their country of origin. The problem with biased and unfair treatment by police and the experiences they hear is that it can be actually quite detrimental to self-worth. And there's a lot of research done in the social psychological literature that actually suggests that it can erode identification with a society. Okay, so it's very important for police to find ways to build and foster trust and not treat these communities in a biased fashion if they want to particularly promote identification with their new adopted country. So why should we care about building trust among these communities? Well, we can see that trust and confidence in police has been in decline in Australia in recent decades. Okay? And it's important to build trust because police rely so heavily on the community to help them deal with crime. Police rely on people to contact them, to report crime, to report suspicious activities. And it's important, therefore, that to promote these kinds of behaviours, police need to be trusted. People need to be able to engage and feel happy about doing so. It's also been shown that trust can enhance identification with society. So it's very important that police foster trust among these new migrants if we want them to assimilate and identify with their adopted country. So the million-dollar question is, well, how can we actually build trust in police? What I'm going to do today is argue that procedural justice is one piece in the puzzle, a very important piece in the puzzle, that can be used by police to promote and build their trust. I've been inspired by Tom Tyler's work. Tyler conducted research in the US from the 1990s, and it's really only been in the last 5 years that scholars in the UK and Australia have really picked up on this type of work. And in 1990, he published his seminal work, which basically challenged the idea that people focus solely on police performance when evaluating police. But instead, people also value interpersonal respect and fair treatment when dealing with authorities. And this is what Tyler referred to as procedural justice. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the term procedural justice, it's basically about people being treated with respect and dignity and perceptions about the fairness of decision making. And Tyler's done a lot of research showing that there are 4 main elements for people to view treatment as procedurally fair. And these are neutrality, respect, trustworthiness and voice. Basically, people want to feel that authorities are dealing with them in a neutral manner, treating them in an unbiased fashion and not being biased by what they think of that particular group. Respect is about being treated politely and with dignity and respect. People respond very positively to being felt like they're respected. Trustworthiness is about police actually demonstrating that they care about people, that they actually have value in what they can contribute to society. So communicating that type of information to people is particularly important as well. And finally, voice, giving people a voice or a say in a decision-making process. Being pulled over by a police officer, people want to have their say. Why might they have been speeding? Even if it's not going to affect the outcome, they at least want to have a say before a decision is made in their case. So what are the benefits of procedural justice? There's been a raft of research undertaken across the US and some of the work being done here in Australia and also in the UK that suggests it can build trust and confidence. It can build people's perceptions that police are legitimate and entitled to be obeyed. It can encourage compliance with police and the law, and it can foster cooperation in collaborative crime control efforts. There's been a recent number of studies actually looking to see whether or not in Muslim communities procedural justice can also improve reporting of counter-terrorism issues. So, there's been quite a lot of work done in this area that shows the positive effects, but what is the limitation of this past research? Almost all of the research that's been conducted has been done using survey methodology or observational research. Now, while that has a lot of credibility, There's been no actual study other than the CEPS trial that actually shows how procedural justice can work in practice and testing its effectiveness across different conditions. So if we want to be 100% confident that procedural justice has a positive effect, an experimental methodology is best practice in demonstrating this. So what I'm going to do today is talk about two studies. I'm going to talk about the community capacity study in study 1, which uses a traditional survey methodology to show whether or not procedural justice can build trust. And I'm also going to present data from the Queensland Community Engagement Trial, which is an experimental field trial of procedural justice policing, and show that it pretty much replicates the same results that we find in observational and survey research. The primary research question that I was interested in asking is, can procedural justice policing improve and promote ethnic minority trust in police? And what I'll show is across both methodologies is yes, it can. So study 1. Community capacity survey was a face-to-face survey study. Basically, people in the community in Brisbane and Melbourne were contacted by phone and invited to participate in a face-to-face interview. We had a quota of 300 people per ethnic group that we were interested in. We targeted 3 ethnic minority groups: Arabic speaking, Indian and Vietnamese in Brisbane and Melbourne. So we ended up with a final sample of 908 participants across those 3 groups. The face-to-face interview included a range of different variables, and the particular ones that we were interested in, wrap up, go faster, okay, were procedural justice. I was also interested in identity issues, whether or not people identified with Australian society or their own ethnic subculture, as well as some demographics, and obviously the variable I was interested in was looking at trust in police. For those of you who aren't statistically savvy, what I want you to do is just focus on the figures in the red boxes, in the red circles. We can see in the middle column, in the procedural justice row, we've got a value of 0.5. Okay, that's basically saying procedural justice had a strong positive impact on trust. The more people felt that police treated them with procedural justice, the more they trusted police. We can also see Australian identity was significant. The more people identified with Australian society, the more trusting they were of police. Ethnic identity had no significant result. Okay, doesn't have any stars next to it. And the interesting thing is looking at the interaction. The interaction was also significant, and this graph here demonstrates the particular pattern of results. What it suggests is that procedural justice is actually more important to people who identify strongly with their own ethnic subgroup. And that's a particularly important finding, because it actually suggests police might actually be able to do something to improve trust among these particularly hard to reach groups. So that's a particular result from the Community Capacity Survey. The next study was the CEPS trial, experimental methodology, a collaboration between University of Queensland and QPS. And QPS actually implemented a change in police practice during random breath testing trials. Okay? So it was a group of police who used procedural justice principles, and there were a group of police that used standard police protocol when pulling people over for the random breath testing. About 21,000 drivers were exposed to either of these 2 conditions, and they were invited to respond to a survey and send that back to University of Queensland scholars. And what I was interested in this particular survey was trust in police. Did the actual trial, the procedural justice condition, have a better effect on trust? I was also interested in the country of birth and the age of respondents. So here is an ANOVA in which you can see the manipulation was significant. So what that basically says is people who experienced the procedural justice condition were more trusting than people who received the standard protocol. You can also see that there is a significant interaction between the manipulation and country of birth. Okay. So the interaction is actually demonstrating that the trial, the procedural justice condition, actually had a stronger effect on people who were born outside of Australia than those who were born in Australia. So again, it's replicating the finding that we're showing from the survey methodology that procedural justice appears to matter more to people from overseas. The last issue I looked at was, what about minority youth? Particularly difficult group to police. So I pulled out from the survey responses those people who were under the age of 25 to look to see whether or not procedural justice could be useful for those younger people. And again, we find the manipulation is significant and the interaction with country of birth is significant. So again, demonstrating it in the graph, we can see it's actually got a stronger effect for minority youth than what it did with the total sample. So in terms of summarising the findings, procedural justice can build trust among minorities and those born overseas. It's particularly so and particularly important for those who identify more strongly with their own ethnic group and for those who are younger than 25. I found the same conclusion using both survey methodology and an experimental methodology. So the basic policy implications from this is we should always aim to use procedural justice when we have interactions with minority groups. It's an easy strategy to implement, much better than trying to change the crime levels. It's easy to change the way you interact with someone. So the last point I wanted to make is obviously the QSET trial was used in a rather benign context, a random breath test, in which someone had a contact for about a 7-minute period. And what I'd like to do is encourage practitioners to think about extending these results to other contexts rather than just random breath testing. Can it be used when they're policing the beat, okay, in the nighttime economy? Can it be used when implementing arrest? And what does this then impact on future offending behaviour, for example? That's it. Thank you.